let's simplify the given trigonometric expression. So we have cotangent alpha times secant alpha minus 1 over 1 plus sine alpha plus secant squared alpha times sine alpha minus 1 over 1 plus secant alpha. So the first step is to rewrite everything in terms of sines and cosines. So cotangent squared is the same thing as cosine squared over sine squared. Secant is just 1 over cosine, and then secant squared is just 1 over cosine squared. So that's this step right here. And now for the next step, I'm going to simplify this right here. So we have 1 over cosine alpha minus 1. Let's get a common denominator by multiplying this by cosine alpha over cosine alpha. So you have 1 over cosine alpha minus cosine alpha over cosine alpha. They have the same denominator, so we could just subtract them. Okay, so that's what they have over here. And so now we can simplify this further, so we'll distribute the square. So cosine over sine squared is just cosine squared over sine squared. Now this cosine on the bottom is going to multiply the denominator. And the reason is because if you have 1 minus cosine alpha divided by cosine alpha divided by 1 plus sine alpha, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal of 1 plus sine alpha. And so these guys are both going to be in the bottom. And so now we can distribute this. Well, first, cosine squared will cancel out the cosine. And so we have cosine alpha times 1 minus cosine alpha over sine squared alpha times 1 plus sine alpha. Now we're going to simplify this term. So here we have 1 plus 1 over cosine alpha. You multiply this by cosine alpha over cosine alpha to get cosine alpha plus 1 over cosine alpha. And then you distribute the square. So 1 over cosine squared is just 1 over cosine squared. Now, for this one, we break this up. So here we have, so for this guy right here, sine alpha minus 1, you're dividing it by cosine alpha plus 1 over cosine alpha, which is really the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So that's sine alpha minus 1 multiplied by cosine alpha over cosine alpha plus 1. So that's this right here. Okay. And the nice thing is that the square is going to cancel with this cosine. We have sine alpha minus 1 on the top. And on the bottom we have cosine alpha plus 1. And then cosine alpha. Okay. So now we'll continue. So we got to combine the simplified terms. So this guy right here, and this is right here. So we start off with this first term, and this second term now become this term and this term. And now we can just simplify. So working with, I guess, well, first let's change this. Sine squared is just the same thing as 1 minus cosine squared. That's what we have here. And now we can factor this out. 1 minus cosine squared is 1 minus cosine times 1 plus cosine. So the 1 minus cosine is going to cancel. We have cosine over 1 plus cosine times 1 plus sine. So we kept this expression the same. We were just working on the first one. So that simplifies. And now we want to add these. But in order to add these, you want to have a common denominator. So far, they have 1 plus cosine alpha as a denominator. So you need to multiply by cosine alpha over cosine alpha in the first one, and then 1 plus sine alpha over 1 plus sine alpha for the second one. So you get cosine squared for the first one. So I'm going to have an intermediate step. So we have cosine squared, and then the new denominator, we'll say ND for new denominator, plus, and then we have sine alpha minus 1. Sine alpha plus 1 is just sine squared minus 1. So this is a different squares with a new denominator. And so you can combine these as cosine squared plus sine squared minus 1 over the new denominator. But notice that cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to 1. So this is equal to 1. So really you have 1 minus 1 over the new denominator. And then 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So it's like 0 over the denominator. We'll say new denominator. So 0 over the new denominator, which is in this case not equal to 0, this will equal 0. So therefore, whatever expression we first started with is going to equal to 0.